Hi, I'm Matt O'Donnell. I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Washington. About a year ago, I had a very, very interesting conversation at a luncheon that was here with a set of Boeing people. I sat next to someone who was a former CEO of Boeing. And during the lunch, we talked about something which is actually a passion of mine, which is the grand challenges which were defined by the National Academy of Engineering about 3 or 4 years ago. If you haven't seen those, by the way, please go to the National Academy site and look at those challenges. 13 challenges for society that engineers will be major solvers of. So I asked the person sitting next to me, former CEO of Boeing, I said, well, what's the grand challenge in the aerospace industry that we're going to see going forward? And without dropping a beat, he immediately said, oh, flight control and autonomous vehicles. And I thought that was I was thinking something about materials or worldwide fleets, and no, he immediately said that. And the reason he said is because you're going to see, with the vast increase in commercial airplane traffic, you're going to see a lot more vehicles in the sky, with major improvements in personal flight devices. You're going to see a lot, and then with the autonomous vehicles, which will be coming in, we'll see even more. So I thought it was perfect that we have the opportunity to cap our lecture series this fall with something which is right on to that topic. As you can see, it's about network systems and the complications associated with very complex networks in terms of the way that you can communicate and control those systems. I'm very happy that we have one of our own faculty tonight who will be giving the talk, which is Mehran Mesbahi. He's from Aeronautics and Astronautics here. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mehran to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt, for the kind introduction. So tonight, as the title suggests, I'm going to be talking about network systems. As you see, I'm going to talk about different things, different aspects of networks in aerospace and biology. But before I get started, I'm going to tell you what I would be doing if I was not here, which is my karate class. What I'm going to show you is that when we, on Wednesday nights, I go to karate in Bellevue. I have a wonderful sensei that expects me to be there. And if I don't show up, she calls me and she says, where are you? So we go through different routines in the karate class. One of them is called kata, or the form, which basically involves a sequence of movements that the karateka, the person who's performing the kata, goes through, and you have to demonstrate the correct course of the technique, correct use of the power, and of course the rhythm. There's a variation on the theme on the kata that involves 3 karateka performing the kata in synchrony, and I'm going to show you a clip of how this would work out. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so typically they are in a group of 3. They create some sort of formation or sort of a triangular form, and they start by going through the sequence. But not only they have to perfect their own movement, but also they have to synchronize with respect to the other karateka. There are different techniques that people use to do this. One of them, of course, is to practice the kata multiple times, about 1,000 at least. But also creating synchrony by signals that you send to the other person. And these signals can be through how do you exert power at a given time, and breathing. And the other one that is kind of obvious is also visual. So for example, if you are in the field of view of the person that is behind you, they have to synchronize with respect to you. And as they go through the sequence of movements, you see the notion of who is in the field of view of who changes. And therefore, that synchronization also changes over time. Okay. Let me show you another instance of synchronization that we see in humans, not only kata, but this is called synchronized walking, which is apparently is an exercise that maybe we should adopt at UW by Japanese students that involves creating formations of this sort. So you basically sort of synchronize your motion, the way that you walk around this kind of, I guess, basketball court of some sort. But you can also come up with very, really neat ways of passing through each other. Now, this is really the cool part, I think, because they can do this in sort of backwards. Yeah, so without any hesitation. And I think what I want you to start thinking about tonight, this Wednesday night, is how would we do something like this for robotic systems? The answer to the second question that involves why on earth we want to do something like that will come later. But for a moment, I want you to think about how we should sort of architect this sort of a robotic networks that can do something like this. So here's an example. This is a project of a colleague of mine at ETH in Switzerland that involves creating sort of this robotic system, robotic networks that do fancy things, like in this case is a juggling or I guess volleyball or tennis. It's not very clear which one. And if you think about this, well, there's an algorithm on each robot that, of course, you have to coordinate your motion in terms of your translation and orientation with respect to the other robot in order to be able to do this ball juggling. Okay. Now, why are we interested to study this large-scale or autonomous robotic networks? And I'm going to put the large-scale qualification on top of that in a minute. But I hope that you agree that they are cool. So just looking at them, they are really cool. Also, if you think about looking at bird flocking, or on PBS show, on Nova, you see School of Fish. There's something intrinsically interesting about them. How do they do something like this? They are beautiful. They have this aesthetic value to them. Not only there is some functionality because of creating these formations, but also there's aesthetic reason. So the coolness, I think, should be enough, I guess, to move on. But there are also a number of aerospace applications that I'm going to talk about tonight. There are also, as I argued towards the maybe sort of 3/4 of the talk, I'm going to try to argue that they also provide a bridge between engineering and lots of other systems that we see in nature, in sociology, biology, and physics. Okay, so let's start with the aerospace applications. So this is the mission that actually I worked on when I was at Jet Propulsion Lab, called the Threshold Planet Finder, which involves multiple spacecraft formation flight. And this is in Sun's orbit, in an orbit that resembles Earth, so it's Earth-like orbit. And what you're involved as you're doing this type of mission, you're doing imaging, optical imaging of distant objects with very high resolution. So Threshold Planet Finder was part of the NASA's Origins program, which sort of I listed the main ideas in the Origins that involved exploring the origin and evolution of life from Big Bang to the present day, investigate the formation of chemical elements, galaxies, stars, planets, investigate the formation and development of life on Earth, and quest for extrasolar planets and extraterrestrial life, which is pretty sort of amazing number of things that you can put in a program. But they identified at the same time some of the key technological challenges to make the Origins program actually work out. And one of them was, of course, these sort of ultra lightweight telescopes like Hubble, but bigger, because for a telescope, as I show on the left top corner, the telescope, the diameter of the telescope determines its resolution. And therefore, in order to be able to really come up with very high resolution images of distant objects, or trying to identify their sort of the chemical elements or the compositions, you have to be able to put a very large telescope in space. The other idea is to do spaceborne optical interferometry, which involves sending multiple spacecraft to space. But now you have different part of the interferometer on the different spacecraft. And as you move the spacecraft to create different geometries, you can actually pick up different frequencies associated with the image. And therefore, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the type of resolutions of the images that you can take. The underlying math or the physics of it is through what is called the Zernak formula, which is basically a sort of, so if you have any math phobia or this kind of, you have allergies to it, you can completely ignore it because I'm going to explain what this is. I like the integrals because they look nice. They have this aesthetic value to them. But the basic idea is that you have this mu of u of v, which is called the mutual coherence function. And this is a function that you can actually evaluate through your optical instruments. And the actual image of this object, the star, the distant object that you're trying to take an image of, is related to this mutual coherence function that you can actually pick up and evaluate. And the idea of synthesizing the image reduces to evaluating this mu of uv at different points on a disk and take a sort of an inverse Fourier transform of it. And therefore, it's very clear that as you can pick up different UV points, the resolution of the image improves, and therefore you get better and better ideas about what this object looks like. So this is a simulation of what I just talked about. So here, what I'm showing is on the right side, I'm showing 3 spacecraft doing this sort of spaceborne optical interferometry. On the left corner, I show the control algorithm that is in charge of flying the spacecraft together. And on the left corner, bottom corner, I'm showing this UV plane coverage and the image that you can synthesize. And as you go through the UV plane, which is this sort of the Fourier plane, and pick up different samples and evaluate it, you get a better and better resolution image for this object that you're trying to identify. And so, for example, in this case, we realized after picking up enough UV points that this object that we were trying to understand is actually a binary star. And actually, optical interferometry allows you to say quite a bit about not only the fact that this is a binary star, but also its composition. You can actually identify the orbit. You can say this is a sort of what type of a star is it? Is it like a G star or sort of composition of the star, some of the key elements, et cetera, et cetera. So you have many, many sort of science facts that sort of you can determine by doing optical interferometry. I'm showing also so that this is a higher sort of high fidelity simulation of the threshold planet finder, how it was envisioned to function. Yeah, so here you are coming from the launch vehicle, the multiple spacecraft sort of separate from each other, and then they create these geometries in space. So they create these geometries, they identify the star, the object that they want to take an image of, and then sort of they go to the right orientation, right position, and they pick up this UV point, which is that mutual coherence function. They evaluate that at a particular point, and then they reorient to go and pick up a different UV point. And by taking enough samples, then you can actually identify through this 2D Fourier transform, you can synthesize the image itself. Now, the question is, why do you have to have 5 instead of 3? So it turns out that, for example, if you want to identify exoplanets, which are these planets orbiting other stars that are Earth-like and are they potentially can sustain life, it's extremely difficult to see them. So you have to null the light coming from the mother star. and therefore you need 5 spacecraft. I can tell you more about this if you're interested. So there's a Nulling technology is also a very, very big deal of sort of big technical challenge for doing spaceborne optical interferometry. So NASA has also, there are lots of studies on taking this to next level. For example, the terrestrial planet imager. As you can see, the number of spacecraft is growing, and you can do more and more interesting science with these type of missions. At the same time, when I was working on the TPF and doing the feasibility analysis, trying to think about the control systems for sort of a multiple spacecraft formation flight, there was another community that also became interested in formations. And these are sort of unmanned aerial vehicles. So autonomous vehicles that create, for example, a sort of a virtual structure, let's say doing synthetic aperture radar. And they are interested to basically autonomously fly multiple aerial vehicles together. So these movies are also, was made, one of my graduate students is a fantastic artist, and he put it together. So the other aspect of this formation is also, for example, doing next generation air traffic management. So in the bottom left corner, you see this multiple aircraft coming together. But at some point, you want potentially to give the control to the autopilot on the aircraft. And you want this, just like that synchronized walking, that the aircraft goes to get, deconflict, do the collision avoidance all autonomously, and then safely land. So there are lots of interest now in understanding how would you create flying unmanned aerial vehicle networks. And our Boeing colleagues here in Tukwila have also this elaborate laboratory that I wanted to mention. This is the Vehicle Swarm Technology Laboratory that they have put together that involves multiple platforms, ground robots, quadrocopters, and all kinds of different vehicles that they can fly or coordinate their motion and sort of test the control algorithms. And our graduate students have actually worked on some of the algorithms in the laboratory as well. So let's start thinking about how would we want to think about designing robotic networks. Okay, so here's one idea. So this is an ad for École Polytechnique at Lausanne that you will see that it involves 278 epochs. These are small robots that kind of move around. And at some point, as they move around, they come and create this geometry. And by looking at the way that they're coming together, you as a viewer of what's going on, you basically get an impression that they are organizing. They are self-organizing, right? They are doing the coordination that we are trying to create here. There's only one issue here, and that's what the title refers to, is that the way that this was made is that they actually start from the coordinated way from the shape, and they disperse, and they take the movie of it and play it backwards, which is, I think, really, really cute. But at some fundamental level, I think you also get a sense that, well, the coordination is not that difficult if you, as an observer, as a global coordinator, can tell the robot to do what at a given time, right? So if I have 278 epochs, and I can tell them exactly what they have to do at a given time, I can create a formation. I can say, go to this particular point at this given time, and I can tell all the 278 of them what to do next. Okay. So tonight I want to say something about, well, this is good, this is fine, especially if you don't have 278 of them. Maybe you have 2 of them, and that's perfectly fine. And in fact, the video that I showed you from ETA about the quadrocopters doing the ball juggling is exactly that. That is, you, as a third party looking at it, you see that they are coordinating, but in fact, they know all the information. Somebody has programmed them and have given them all the information they need to do the ball juggling. And I want to argue that this architecture, although it's nice for small-scale robotic systems, but it's not scalable. So we want to think a little bit about how would we create something like this in a more distributed way so that information is locally is distributed among the robots, and there's no one global coordinator to make this all happen. And the argument is that it is scalable if you can make it distributed. It's fault tolerant in a sense that if I have to take one of the robots out, the formation you can still create the formation. Whereas in that other picture, if I take the centralized coordinator, the global coordinator out, everything will break down. And also at some fundamental level, thinking about distributed decision-making, distributed local interactions between the robots, makes us become closer and closer to things that we see in nature. Okay, so this is, again, another point that I'm going to make, and then come back to some examples of this. Okay, so what do I mean by that? What do I mean by coming closer and closer to nature? Well, take our case, for example, living on Earth, through this N-body problem in the solar system. And if you think about what is going on here and what causes, this whole thing to work out, is basically some local interactions between pairwise objects in this picture. That is, there is universal gravitational law that says every object attracts each other with a force that is inversely proportional to the distance squared. So the relative distance become important, but the relative distance between two objects. So there's two pairs, one pair of objects that I have to look at any given time. And the force basically takes over inversely proportional to the distance squared and proportional to the masses. And then the system goes. Okay? So there's no global coordinator whatsoever that basically says the solar system has to evolve according to this, that every object should be here at a given time. You are just basically following a simple rule called universal gravitational law. And that has a function, and the function is that now we're here, right? So if the inversely squared law doesn't work, then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't fall in love. We wouldn't have these beautiful autumn days in Seattle. So how would that move on? So this is three bodies. Again, you look at it and say, wow, this is really interesting. Somebody is putting this all together, right? Because it looks like a planned thing. But no, actually there is just the inverse square law with three bodies. Now, let's look at something a little bit more aesthetic, I think. I'm going to talk about the starlings of Otmor. You can find this on YouTube. I highly encourage that you do that after the talk if you haven't seen it. It's really beautiful, and I'm going to actually don't say anything because it has nice music. And it basically shows how the starlings of Otmor basically organize and go through these beautiful motions that it's very difficult to comprehend. Why would they do something like this? But more to the point, is there a global coordinator here, or are they doing that by following some local interaction rule? Okay? All right, so let's play this.
They start out flying in the groups they've been feeding with all day, and slowly merge into bigger and ever denser flocks. I've spent hours watching and never seen a collision. How can that be possible? Individuals, but moving in a single entity. And the reason for this behaviour? Well, thousands of eyes looking for predators on the roost site. Nothing could escape their gaze. No raptor could surprise this soaring mass of bird flesh. The activity warms their bodies for the cold night ahead. And There's something social going on here, because when they do settle to roost, the warmest, safest perches in the reeds will be taken by the dominant males. Adolescents and females will be pushed to the edges. So the birds are also manoeuvring for position, social position. And then, when the moment is right, they behave in a way that should be impossible.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about. Okay, fine. I will come back to this. All right, if you want to see what happens next. So what I want to do next is to give you a little bit of a theory. Again, if you haven't had your Claritin, your math allergy kicks in, don't look at the equations. I will tell you exactly what's going on. But I'm going to do it very minimally, okay? And then I'm going to talk about, now that we have created, or we have an architecture, we're thinking about robotic networks. The next question that will arise is, how would we interact with these robotic networks as an outsider? That is, can we actually come up with a mechanism that we can actually control the robotic networks? And then I'm going to make a very sharp turn and talk about biology. And then at some point, if you guys are still here, I will talk about network security. All right. So let's talk about distributed autonomous coordination. So the question that I raised at the beginning of the talk was, how would you think about coordination? How would you think about robotic networks? So if you think about other aspects of coordination, for example, how we as a society adopt a particular belief, or how a rumor propagates through the society. So let's, for example, as our distinguished Dean of College of Engineering passes a rumor to his right, and of course we're going to fill up the gap here. So the rumor, for example, passes through this room, and we wrap around and come around, and the rumor somehow fills the room up. So we want to understand, well, how did it happen? At some point, the rumor has spread out through the room, and everybody has a belief about why this guy is wearing a blue tie tonight. And I want to understand, well, what is the underlying mechanism for that? How is it that everybody kind of coordinated on their belief about my tie? So one of the key things here is that how the information actually was passed on. And I'm going to use the notion of graphs to basically make an abstraction of this very simple idea, that because the way that the information went to the right, that creates some sort of a structure for the flow of information. We're going to use a graph abstraction for that. So we have nodes. These nodes are physical entities, humans, birds, that are actually have this local limited resources for their computation or communication or field of view, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, they do not have global information about the state of the world. And then we're going to use edges, which are basically lines that connect the nodes, that basically codify what information is available to who at a given time. So for example, on this bottom figure, I'm showing these unmanned aerial vehicles, and there's some sort of a network that connects them. So you see these lines from between the nodes that basically says who has information about whose state. So if I do this for this sort of a network robotic system, so if I have, for example, the figure on the left that says, I have these 6 nodes, and they have some sort of a field of view about their information. So this is a geometric graph. And what that means is that I know the information about somebody who is in my sphere. So X1, this node 1, can know the state of X2, but not necessarily x6, because that's outside of the field of view. So if I adopt, for example, this geometric picture, this is the field of view idea, then you can create the graph that represents the flow of information will be to your right. There's nothing magical about the sphere. For example, in that the kata movement, if the field of view is some sort of a cone, you can also create a graph that basically has 3 nodes, and the field of view will, at a given time, the position and the orientation of the person who is performing the kata determines whose information is available to whom. Okay, so next, I'm going to use this idea of creating this sort of a local geometries that basically says, now that I have a state, so the state can be position, orientation of this robotic element, or the belief of a group. And then I'm going to define this notion of a neighborhood. And every node on every element in this group will update their state. So they update their position or their belief or their orientation according to the information that is available to them at a given time. Okay? So this is very similar, again, to what we have kind of seen before, that is based on some information that I have about my neighbors. I will react to that. And I don't have a global information about the state of the world. So the x dot means this is a derivative in time. So, and xk plus 1, which means that you update, like your belief, you can update it given this state given your belief in the previous time and what you're hearing from your neighbors. Okay? That kind of makes perfect sense, I suppose. All right. So the key idea here is that given this, how would you pick up the update rule? That is, how would you react to the information that is available to you so that you end up coordinating with respect to the entire group? But your information is only local. So to understand this, in our group, we look at canonical problems. So one of them, one of my favorite ones, is called the rendezvous problem. The rendezvous problem is basically 2 agents, 2 robots, want to meet at a particular point. They don't know their position originally. They don't even know where the other robot is in some global coordinate frame. The only thing that's available to them is, what is this robot doing with respect to me? Okay? And based on that information, the robot makes a decision to move in the direction of the other robot. Okay? It doesn't need to know what the robot, where it is in some global frame. It just needs to know where it is with respect to itself. And if everybody adopts that, then it's very clear, I think it's very intuitive, that they're going to come and meet at a certain point. Right? So that's very, very simple idea. So let's see how this works out. So if you write the math, and you can extend this not to from 2 robots to n robots, when n is 1,000, a million, it doesn't matter at this point. But every robot moves in the direction that is sort of a centroid of the robots that are neighbors of it. And if you can do that, then you can show, let's see if this works, that all the robots come together. Okay, so you start from some sort of a graph that basically says who has information about who, and everybody updates their state according to this local rule that says, I'm just going to move in towards the centroid of my neighbors. And I don't know where else everybody else is. I just have, a couple friends. I'm going to move towards the centroid of this friend. And if the network is connected, then everybody will have this sort of rendezvous at a given point. So how is this useful? Well, we have taken this algorithm, which is very distributed. It doesn't require global information. It's very reactive. Everybody kind of moves according to the relative distance to the other people around them. And you can actually use this and build up the whole machinery to create all kinds of distributed robotic network algorithms. So for example, you can create, let's see, Yeah, actually, I wanted to play the other one, but this is fine. So for example, you can synthesize networks that have good properties. So for example, this is all autonomous nodes that come together and create this geometry, and based on a very simple local algorithm. The other one is that you're basically running this rendezvous algorithm, but you give it an offset, and you can create these geometries in space very efficiently. It's very robust. Lots of mathematical analysis that goes to understanding, some of the properties of this type of algorithms that have the property of being reactive and based on local information. So let me also show you how we have extended this to other things. So for example, this is a group of unmanned aerial vehicles. We have used models that resemble constant speed UAVs. And they actually do something similar to that synchronized walking now. Okay, so they come together, create the formation. By adding some other potential into the algorithm, you can actually do collision avoidance. And it looks beautiful. I think it looks very nice, and it's applicable now to a setting that is a little bit more complicated. The consensus algorithm or the rendezvous algorithm it just provides the basis for all the other work that we have done. So here's another example. This is a nonlinear model. So we have the spacecraft or orientation is driven by nonlinear dynamics. But you can extend this rendezvous problem to create distributed algorithms for all the satellites to coordinate in respect to their orientation. Okay. So there's lots of work in this area in controls field applications to all kinds of different things. But one of the key ideas is how do you create robotic networks that do interesting things. They have ramifications for doing interesting science. But at the same time, I think there are other issues that you have to be thinking about. So I talked about some of the good things about autonomous networks. So we have nice algorithms. They are cool. They have nice applications for unmanned aerial vehicles, even ground robots, search and rescue missions, imaging. There's all kinds of applications for this type of systems. And also at some level, they also provide this bridge to the science. I haven't nailed the last one yet, but I'm going to do that in a moment. But at the same time, I think when you think about these systems, they are vulnerable in a sense that it's not very clear that if I disturb them, how are they going to react? How is it that, for example, if I make a delay in one of these links, if I jam one of the links, if I make one of the nodes do something a little bit different, how would the system react to that possibility? The analysis turns out to be non-trivial. We need some new mathematics, and I think that's one of the things that we have kind of developed in our group. And also the idea of how do you control them? How do you interact with these robotics networks? It's not very clear that we as humans are very comfortable with having all these robots flying around in our airspace. For example, this is potentially the way that we're going to be interacting with these robots. And this is a big issue for us. Once we have, of course, these are not robots yet, but how would we come into that space? Now, you have to be worried about this, I think, because in 2025, I don't have a crystal ball, but I thought that this would be fun. It's very, very much possible that in 2025 or so, plus or minus 50 years, you will have an air show that is unmanned aerial vehicles. Instead of Blue Angels flying in formation, you will have unmanned aerial vehicles doing really, really cool acrobatics for you as you're enjoying your summer day in Seattle. But what worries me even more is that if they are mixed, so for example, you have a piloted aircraft and an unmanned aerial vehicle doing the air show together. And I think that's really, I'm not very comfortable with that, even as an engineer. because the way that a human fly an aircraft is very different from the way that we are programming on unmanned aerial vehicles to fly. And how that sort of multiple time scale, how this heterogeneity will come into picture is not very clear. Okay, so which means that we have to think about this a little bit ahead of time. Rather than creating them and then say, oh, let's actually think about how we're going to blend this in our sort of daily lives, in our airspace and so forth. One of the key ideas that I want to stress tonight is that the network structure affects the way these autonomous networks respond to external influence. And I think this is really, really important. And I think if there's one thing that you want to maybe remember from my talk tonight, is that one of the theses, one of the ideas that we're trying to argue is that it's very important that as we put these robotic networks together, we think about how are we putting them together and what is the underlying network of their interactions. So let me show you what I mean by this. So here's an example of a group of unmanned aerial vehicles in formation that are hit by a gust. So this is this is in seafare, right? So, and this is how they're going to respond because the way that they're creating their formation together. Okay, so the links are basically showing who is interacting with who, and depending on where the gust hits, they can have a very different response than, for example, this next one, where the same gust hits, but now their formation, the way that they're interconnected together is different. And in our lab, we have actually created an algorithm that creates this switching between different geometries so that the formation as a whole responds favorably to something that it was not intended, like a gust. I'm going to think about controllability now. I'm showing my colleague at Georgia Tech, who is sitting very comfortably with his robots in complete control of what they're doing at that time. You see the flying robot and then the robots around him. I want to argue that Magnus is in complete control of his robots. There's this notion of controllability that somehow he can derive this formation to any point at a given time because he has this central computer and he can just press a button and think about controlling his networks. There's a notion in control theory that is called controllability that involves the following idea. If I have a dynamic system that is moving around and I want to push it in a particular direction to some arbitrary direction, do I have control over that? And how much control do I need to do that? And in this case, Magnus appears to have that control. Whereas in my laboratory, this is the situation that I find myself usually. Okay, so a couple of years ago, a former member of our group, we proved this idea, this theorem, let's call it a theorem, that basically the algorithm that I showed you that has, we created a formation, we did a rendezvous, we did all kinds of things with it. There's some fundamental issue about the controllability of that type of algorithm that involves the symmetry of the structure that we have created. So for example, if these robotic networks are running this algorithm, and the way I come in and I want to control them, it really matters if the network itself has some sort of symmetry, so it looks symmetrical, and the way that I'm coming in and interacting with these robots is also conforms to that symmetry. And if that's the case, we have proven that the system is uncontrollable. So symmetry of the network, the way we interact with it, has implications about how much control do you have on this robotic network. And I'm going to take this idea, I'm going to take a very, very sharp turn and talk about genomic networks. Everybody's cool so far? All right. Okay, so here's the work that I have been pursuing with a couple of my colleagues, and I will talk about them in a moment, about network controllability, how much control do you have over the network from outside, and genomic networks. So this is how the story started. So these are my colleagues at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Institute in Seattle, Indika Rajapakse and Mark Gurdeen. Mark has been a pioneer in terms of understanding genomic networks, and Indika has been my inspiration in terms of bringing control issues into the setting of sort of genomic biology. So they have become interested to understand many different aspects of genomic biology, but one of them involves genomic reorganization. Let me tell you a little bit what that means. So what I'm showing here is basically a stem cell differentiating, which means becoming specialized from the stem cell configuration to, in this case, a red blood cell. So as you see inside the nucleus is actually reorganizing itself. So it goes through these different geometries. At some point, it becomes specialized, it becomes red blood cell, and then at some point, the nucleus actually exits the cell. So they have been trying to take images of this and trying to figure out what is it about differentiation that causes the cell, the inside of the cell, the nucleus, to reorganize itself. And they have this very elaborate apparatus, lots of experiments that basically, and like a microscope, of course, that you can take the cell, you can sort of paint the chromosome inside the nucleus by a method like a multicolor fish. And then they can take slices of the cell nucleus as it goes through differentiation. And then they put it together. They create 3D maps of how the cell looks like. And what I'm showing here is actually the colors represent the chromosome, the location of the chromosomes inside the cell. Okay? So now we want to think about the location of the chromosomes as creating this network. But why are they interested in the location of the chromosomes is because they have the scientific community, and Indika and Mark have actually pursued this really fascinating idea that as the cell differentiates, so it goes through this cell cycle and at some point differentiates to become specialized, so become a muscle cell, a blood cell, and etc. During an interphase, which is this one of the key segments of the cell cycle, the structure of the chromosome inside the cell says something about how and whether it's going to specialize or not, and to what. Okay, so this is very, very important because as I take images of the dynamics of the chromosome inside the cell, I can correlate that to what the functionality of the cell will be. Okay, so would it be a red blood cell or muscle cell, etc. And there are techniques to actually make this very mathematically precise. So they can, for example, create these matrices that says, how the gene expression levels changes over time during differentiation, and then look at the geometry of the chromosomes inside the cell, and then they can actually create metrics on how to compare these two matrices, and it turns out that they are highly correlated. Okay, so now we are thinking about chromosome networks. So these are actually images that Fred Hutch, in collaboration with Microsoft Research, have synthesized, that you can now look at the inside of the cell, look at the nucleus, look at the chromosome locations, paint them, and then you can capture actually put an ellipsoid around it. You can do some nice, cool statistics, and come up with a very clear picture of how the chromosomes are located inside the nucleus. Now, why is this important? They are important because this observation is important because if the cell geometry, by geometry I mean the location of the chromosomes, has some implication about the function of the cell, then you can think about some sort of cellular reprogramming. So here's a setup that was initiated by Weintraub at Fred Hutch. And the idea is that is it possible that you can reprogram the cell? Okay, so you take this, the top line shows this sort of a normal differentiation. You take a satellite cell or stem cell, and then you go through myoblast and myotube, and then as you get the sort of a muscle cell. And at the bottom corner, that's what sort of fundamental work that Weintraub did, is that you take the fibroblast, which is some configuration of the nucleus, and you inject this external signal, MyoD, and then the stem cell, in this configuration, it's not completely stem cell, but it's at the configuration that you can drive the fibroblast to differentiate to become a muscle cell, okay? And that's induced by this external signal. And if you can, you can go on and on about the idea of having control about the location of the chromosomes inside the cell. That has a lot of implications. So this is, for example, you take a stem cell, you differentiate it, or in some really groundbreaking work by Yamanaka in Japan, you can actually take a differentiated cell or at a state close to being differentiated and differentiate back to the stem cell, which opens up all kinds of possibilities that is just mind-boggling. So when we looked at this with Indika and Mark, the idea was, well, when you look at this picture, you need, there is this external signal that is driving the network, okay? And is it possible that we can think about this as a controllability notion? That is, the signal is coming and attached into the network and driving the network forward. And since the geometry of the network and its function are correlated, in a sense, the signal is driving the functionality of the cell. So you can start from a stem cell and differentiate to become a red blood cell, which is kind of absurd in a sense that the idea that we have created for robotic networks now suddenly has this interesting implication for something that is, to some extent, much more profound, I think, at the basic level. Okay, so this is the paper that actually we published a few months ago in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences that basically looks at this idea that not only this actually conforms to the idea of controllability of networks, we can actually show that there's a very neat connection between the order. So remember that theorem that we show about the symmetry of the network and how that's related to controllability. We can actually connect the order of the genomic network to how controllable it is. And we can actually validate, not only through experiments, but also through sort of theoretical analysis, that these two are basically two facets of the same coin. That is, order in the network actually has ramifications for its controllability. And if that's the case, then there is a possibility that you can think about potentially a abnormal differentiation or cancer as really a control problem, in a sense that as the cell is differentiating, as it becomes abnormal, it has to pass through this phase that you can actually induce through external signals, transcription factors, and redirect the differentiation, abnormal differentiation, to some other target configuration. And that target configuration has a ramification for its function, and everything is solved. Yeah, okay. But I think this is a neat way of looking at this, in a sense that it's, I don't think it will solve the cancer problem, but it's providing a very unique way of looking at it that I think is pretty amazing. Why is this research important? Network systems, autonomous networks, will be pervasive in our society, I think, in the years to come. And I think we need to understand at some fundamental level how to interact with them, how secure they are. If we are creating this formation of spacecraft, how reliable are they? How are we going to interact with them? And then at some fundamental level, trying to find this bridges between engineering and biological, social, and physical sciences. So I'm going to acknowledge the funding agencies that have supported my work, without who I would not be able to do all these really amazing things in our group. Not by me, of course, by the graduate students and postdocs. And here's the picture of the group on a sunny day, and it has been a privilege to work with them. I want to finish with a slide of my book that is not available tonight, but I can send you for free. If you, no, okay. I charge you $2 for it. All right, thank you so much.